All right, so this is the first day of matrices, okay? I'm going to try to go slowly. If I start going too fast, I just want you to raise your hand and ask me politely to please slow down, okay? Because it is a bit complex. Hi. Okay, so here's question 1, okay? Thank you. So right here on example 1, on the left-hand side, I want you to hook these together like that, and I want you to call that matrix A. The right-hand side of the equal sign is matrix B, okay? If they ask you to write an augmented matrix, it's super easy. Look what you do. So you do, it's like a bracket right there, okay? And do you see in front of all the variables, those coefficients? You just write down those coefficients, okay? So in front of the x, you have a 1. Sorry, I'm having pen issues right now. This is not what we need. Okay, so in front of the x, I have a 1. Okay, in front of the x, we have a 1. In front of the y, we have a 2. In front of the z, we have a 1. Then I want you to draw a solid line, and then you have the constant over there, which is an 8. Second row, in front of the x is a 2. In front of the y is a 1. In front of the z is a -1. And then you have a 1. Underneath, 1, 1, -2, -3. That's an augmented matrix. Okay, you have to make sure the x's are lined up, y's are lined up, z's are lined up, equal signs are lined up. Okay, these right here are called rows. These up here are called columns. Okay, one more thing I want you to write down. This right here is row 1. Row, and then I do like a sub 1. Underneath it is row 2. And underneath that is row 3. Okay? All right. A square matrix, this actually came up a couple of times. A square matrix has the same number of rows as columns. Okay? So if you look going down, this has 3 rows and across has 3 columns. That's called a square matrix. It has to be a square. Okay? All right. So today you're going to learn 2 methods. One is called Gaussian, and the other one is called row echelon. Okay, so I want everybody to watch right here. This is important, okay? Stay focused. If you have a 2 by 2, meaning 2 down and 2 across, and you're using Gaussian elimination, the only thing you have to do is get a 0 right there. That's all you have to do, okay? If you have a 3 by 3, which will be most of the time, then all you have to do is get a 0 here and here and here. Now I'm going to give you an order in which you should make those zeros. If you go out of order, most of the time it doesn't matter. Sometimes it messes you up. So it's best to just follow the order, unless it's kind of like a different situation, which we'll run into those and I'll show you. So the first thing I want you to do is to get a 0 there. The second thing is to get a 0 there. And the third thing is to get a 0 there. Okay? You guys, you're going to learn like 5 methods of solving matrices. That's why it gets kind of complicated. So here's the formula for Gaussian. Okay? You take that augmented matrix and you manipulate it so that you get zeros in the corners, like we talked about here, 2 by 2 or 3 by 3, and then draw a solid line right there, and then you just have numbers over there. So that's the formula, okay? So I'm going to start with question number 2, and first I'm just going to do it algebraically, and then I'm going to do matrices. Okay, so look at that equation. Look at those equations. It's called a system. Okay, I want to solve this using elimination. You guys, if I added, don't write this down, but if I added these 2 equations together right now, I'd get 2x plus 3y equals 8, and that doesn't do me any good because now I just have a third equation, right? So what I want to do is I want something to be able to be eliminated. Well, the x's are almost all ready to be eliminated. They're both 1s. I just need to change the sign. So I'm going to distribute a negative across the top, and I'll have negative x minus 2y equals negative 5. Now the x's go away, so I have negative y equals negative 2. Change my signs, y equals 2. The answer is going to be an ordered pair. The y value is a 2. And now what you do, guys, is you come up here to equation 1, or you come in there to equation 2. It doesn't matter which one you choose. You put a 2 in for y, and you find your x. I always choose the easiest one. I want to make it as easy as possible. So in my opinion, that's the easiest option. So then I'm going to go x plus y, which is 2, is equal to 3. Move my 2 over. I get x equals 1. The answer is 1, 2, and I'm done. Okay? Okay, now we're going to do it using matrices. Okay? So take your pencil and draw that bracket. The x coefficient is the 1. The y coefficient is a 2. Draw your line, and then you've got a 5. Finish your bracket. Then on the bottom, you have a 1, and you have a 1, and you have a 3. Okay, now watch closely, and if I can make the connection from the left to the right, I think it's going to help this whole thing click, like literally for the next 4 lessons. I'm not exaggerating. Okay, so watch closely. All I'm doing, literally all I'm doing is elimination, but it's inside of a matrix. So look, I'm trying to get a 0 right there. Okay, I have to write down a formula for what I'm doing. Okay, how can I get a 0 right there? Well, I can just subtract the rows. I can just say row 1 minus row 2 becomes my new row 2. So that would just be 1 minus 1 gives me a 0. That's like this, guys. That's like leaving that first equation the way it is, changing those signs, and adding them together. Okay? I could also do this. You don't have to write this down. I could do row 2 minus row 1 becomes my new row 2. I could do the bottom minus the top or the top minus the bottom. It doesn't matter. No matter what I do, I'm going to get a 0. Who says I understand that? Raise your hand. Let me see. Okay, so don't write the bottom one. Let's just do the top one. Okay, so see how it becomes my new row 2? That tells me my row 1 doesn't change. So the first thing I do is I write down what doesn't change. And then I follow my formula. So row 1 minus row 2 is 1 minus 1, which is a 0. 2 minus 1 is a 1, and 5 minus 3 is a 2. Okay, now freeze right there and let me show you something. I'm just connecting it to this. Okay, so look what I did. It's just like I did this. It's like I wrote the first equation down the way it was. I distributed a negative across the second equation. Those went away, and I got y equals 2. This right here is my y equals 2. No x, 1y equals 2. Who says, I understand what you're saying? Give me some feedback, how we're doing. Okay, we're done with the matrix. We're literally done with the matrix. There's nothing more I need to do. So now what you do is you start at this bottom row, and I want you to write down what that means. So that means 0 times x plus 1 times y is equal to 2. Well, the 0 times x obviously doesn't need to be there because 0 times x is a 0, right? The plus in front of the y also doesn't need to be there. So what that really means is y is 2. So I'm going to make my ordered pair, and I know my y is a 2. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to that row, and I'm going to put in a 2 for y. So that row at the top means x plus 2y equals 5, which was my first equation. Now I'm just going to put in a 2, so I'm just substituting it in. So that would be x plus 2 times 2 is 4 equals 5. Move your 4 over, you get x equals 1. I got the same answer. Of course I'm going to get the same answer. It's the same problem. I just use different methods for solving it, okay? Who says I'm with you? Raise your hand, let me see. Okay, great. Okay, you have to be careful what you can do and what you can't do, okay? So look what you can do. You can switch rows, okay? You can multiply a row by a constant number, but right there, I want you to put not 0. You would never multiply a whole row by 0. That would just turn your whole rows into the whole row into zeros, which doesn't make any sense. You can add rows together, okay? Things you can't do. You cannot multiply rows together. You cannot divide rows by each other. And you cannot multiply or divide by a 0, okay? Okay, we're going to go with question 3, and we're going to go really slowly, okay? Here we go. Let's set this guy up, okay? You're going to want to write small. Don't go too huge on this because it's a long process, okay? Across the top, 1, 1, 1, solid line, 1. Underneath, 2, 2, there is no Z, so I'm going to put a 0 and then a 6. Underneath, 3, 4, -1, and 13. Okay, listen carefully. Today is the beginning of 4 days of matrices, and if I can get you through today, I feel like you're on your way to understanding this, okay? So listen carefully. The first thing I need to do is to get a 2 right there, okay? When you do this with me on your homework, almost always on your homework, and on your quiz, I'm always going to give you a 1 right there, okay? Because you can use the 1 to get rid of the 2, okay? Well, I want that 2 that I highlighted to be a 0. So if I could turn the 1 into a -2, then I would take the -2, I would add it to the +2, and I would get a 0. Who says I understand that? Okay? It's just like this. Look right here what I'm trying to say to you. If I wanted to eliminate the x's, I would take a -2, I would distribute it right there, then I'd have a -2x and a +2x, and those would go away. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go -2 multiplied by row 1. Added to row 2 becomes my new row 2. That little formula that we wrote down, you have to write that, okay? Now draw your arrow like this. I know row 1 is not changing, so I'm going to write it down. 1, 1, 1, solid line, 1. I know row 3 is not changing. 3, 4, -1, 13, okay? Now I want you to show work for what you're doing, because if you mess up, I have to try to figure out what you did wrong, okay? So take a -2 and distribute it across the top row. Everybody write it right here. -2, -2, -2, -2. All I did is take the top row and multiply every number by a -2. Now I'm going to write row 2 right underneath it, and then all I'm going to do is add those together. So -2 plus 2 is a 0. -2 plus 2 is a 0, a -2 and a 0 is a -2, a -2 and a +6 is a 4. Okay? Who says, I understand? Raise your hand. I'm with you. Give me feedback. I got to see how we're doing. We okay? You okay? Now, I'm going to switch my order. I'm supposed to make this guy right here a 0, okay? But look what I notice. I notice row 2 has 2 zeros in it. So if I just flip-flop my row 2 and my row 3, if I pull those zeros down, then I've got 2 of my 3 zeros, and I didn't even do any math. I just switched them, okay? So I'm going to do this. Row 2 becomes row 3, and row 3 becomes row 2. So I'm going to switch them, and that's not against the rules. So row 1 doesn't change. Switch row 2 and row 3. So now I have 3, 4, -1, 13. Underneath that, 0, 0, -2, +4. Now I'm almost done. because the 3 zeros I'm supposed to have are in the corner, and the only one that's not a 0 is that one. Yes, I went out of order. Once in a while, going out of order makes sense. Not usually, but this is one where it makes sense. So if I'm trying to turn something into a 0, I always use the 1. If I can turn the 1 into a -3, then I'll have a -3 added to a +3, and that'll give me a 0. So I'm going to go -3 multiplied by row 1. That'll make it a -3. Add it to row 2, which is a +3, then I'll have my 0. Becomes my new row 2. Okay, so row 1 doesn't change. Solid ones. Row 3 doesn't change. Now I'm going to take row 1 and distribute it by -3. So I'm going to go -3, -3, -3, -3. Then I'm going to write row 2 underneath it. 3, 4, -1, 13. Add those together and I get 0, 1, -4, +10. I'm done. I'm done with my matrix because I've got those zeros in the corner and that's what I needed to do. Okay, so now what I do is I start at the very bottom right here and I write down what that equation is. That means 0 times x, I don't need to write that, plus 0 times y, I don't need to write that, minus 2 times z is equal to 4, so z is a -2. So now I can come right here, and where the z goes, I'm going to put in a -2. Now as soon as I have that, I move to the row up above it. That means no x, 1y, minus 4z equals 10. That's what that pink line means, that pink row. But I know z is a -2. So it's going to be y minus 4 times a -2 equals 10. That's y plus 8 equals 10. Move my 8 over, and y equals 2. Now I move to the row up above that. That means x plus y plus z equals 1. That is x plus 2 minus 2 equals 1. 2 minus 2 goes away. I know that x is 1. There's always a matrix problem on your final, just so you know. Okay? Okay, we're going to check it. Checking on this final is going to be huge. Huge. Such a huge part of your test is checkable. Every person in this room, grab your calculator in your hands. I'm going to store in those numbers. I'm going to store 1 in for A, and I'm going to put 2 in for B, and C in -2 in for C. So everybody go 1, store, enter. 2, store, write, enter. -2, store, write, enter. Okay, then go to the original equation, and I'm going to put in the left-hand side right here, and I better get a 1. So I'm going to go membar, enter, plus membar, right, enter, plus membar, right, enter, enter, and I got a 1. It worked. Just because the first one works doesn't mean all of them are going to work, and they all have to work. So now I go 2, membar, enter, plus 2, membar, right, enter, enter. That one worked. Now I have to do the last one. So it is 3, membar, enter, plus 4, membar, enter, minus membar, right, enter, enter, and well, say it again.
You did 3, well, in the calculation.
Oh, yeah. She knows exactly what I did wrong. I did A twice, thank you. So it's 3, membar, enter, plus 4, membar right, enter, minus membar right, enter, enter, and it works. Good, thank you. It's awesome that you knew exactly what I did wrong. Okay, so that was example 3. Here's example 4. Okay, yes, sir. No, you don't. I thank you for saying that. Checking is not required, but I would, of course, do it. Okay? Okay, here we go. Very slowly. Okay? Okay, set your matrix up. Across the top, 1, 2, 1, solid line, 8. Underneath, 2, 1, negative 1, 1. Underneath, 1, 1, negative 2, negative 3. Everybody freeze right here. Stay with me. Stay with me. Okay? All right. I need this to be a 0. Use the 1. Turn it into that number. Turn it into a 2, but with a different sign. Okay, so I need the 1 to be a negative 2. So I'm going to take a negative 2. I'm going to multiply it by row 1. That'll give me a negative 2. Then I'm going to add it to row 2. And that's going to become my new row, tell me, row 2. Because the pink highlighted 2 is in row 2. So that's the one I'm trying to change. Okay, look at the very first thing I always do. I write the rows that are not changing. If you are messy, you are going to mess up on a sign, or you won't be able to read your numbers and you're going to miss it. You can't be messy. Take a negative 2 across the top and you have negative 2, negative 4, negative 2, negative 16. All I did is take the top row and distributed a negative 2. Put row 2 underneath it, add those together, and you get 0, negative 3, negative 3, negative 15. Okay? The second number I need to change is right there, and it needs to be a 0. I could either do row 1 minus row 3, or I could do 3 minus row 1. It doesn't matter. I'm going to do row 1 minus row 3 becomes my new row 3. So row 1 doesn't change. Row 2 doesn't change. Row 1 minus row 3. 1 minus 1, 0. 2 minus 1, 1. 1 minus a negative 2. That's 1 plus 2, which is 3. 8 minus a negative 3, that's 8 plus 3, which is an 11. Now the last thing I need to do is to make that guy a 0. Okay, everybody freeze right here for just a second. Okay, just freeze. What if I did this? Just watch. Don't write, please. Negative 2 times row 3. So I made that a negative 2. Then I added it to row 1. Becomes my new row 3. Imagine what that would do. Distribute a negative 2 across the bottom. Add my top row to my bottom row. And then replace it right there. It's not okay. Can anybody tell me why? It messes up that 0. It's going to turn that guy into a negative 2. I can't do that. Okay, so I want you to come back over here to where you put the order of what you were turning right here. Okay, clear up here. Do you see this step 3? Write a note to yourself that says don't use row 1. On step 3, you cannot use row 1 or it's going to mess up the 0 that you just got. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay, so we can't do that. So instead of that, I am going to multiply row 3 by a 3. Then I'll have a 3 and a negative 3, and I'm good. So I'm going to go 3 times row 3 added to row 2 becomes my new row 3. Okay, so look, row 1 doesn't change. Row 2 doesn't change. Multiply row 3 by 3, and I want you to write this down, please. 0, 3, 9, 33. Write down row 2. 0, negative 3, negative 3, negative 15. Add those together. 0, 0, 6, positive 18. I'm done with my matrix. I got my 3 zeros. Raise your hand up high if you're following me. Big raise all the way to the ceiling so I can gauge how we're doing. Okay, lots of people are good. On the bottom, no x, no y, 6z equals 18, so z must be 3. You have to write it as an ordered triple. The third value is a 3. Go up to row 2. No x, minus 3y, minus 3z equals negative 15. But I know that z is 3. So that's going to be a negative 3y minus 9 equals negative 15, because negative 3 times 3 is a negative 9. Move my 9 over. Negative 3y equals negative 6. Divide by negative 3, and you get y equals 2. Now go to the top and figure out what x is. So it's x plus 2 times y plus z equals 8. So that's x plus, if y is a 2, 2 times 2 is a 4, plus z, which is 3, is equal to 8. That gives you x plus 7 equals 8. Move your 8 over, x equals 1. Done. 1, 2, 3. Okay, this is one of many methods you're going to learn. Okay, example 5. Nice and slowly. Okay, across the top, 1, 1, 1, solid line 3. Underneath, 2, negative 1, 1, 2. What do I put the very first number on the bottom row? Can you tell me? 0, because there is no x. 3, 1, 1. Okay, everybody look at this for a sec. I could switch row 2 and row 3. I could totally do that. But I also have to have a 0 where that 0 is. So if I just leave it alone, I've got my second number. So I'm not going to switch because I feel like this doesn't do me any good. It doesn't give me something that I didn't have anyway. So if you want to switch, you can switch. Let's all do it the same, but on your homework or whatever, you can switch. I just don't see the benefit. So I'm going to get a 0 right there. Use the 1. Turn the 1 into the opposite of what's that. So negative 2 times row 1. Now you're going to start helping me. Plus, tell me what to put here. Row 2 becomes my new, talk to me, row 2. Is that little formula that I'm writing required? Yes, it is. Okay. If you miss this, you guys, I want to give you as much partial credit as I can. And if you don't show me what you're doing, I can't give you anything. So yes, it is. Okay, I wrote row 1 and row 3. Take a negative 2 and distribute it across the top. And you have negative 2, negative 2, negative 2, negative 6. Write row 2 underneath it. 2, negative 1, 1, 2. Add those together. And you get 0, negative 3, negative 1, negative 4. I'm almost done. I only have to get one more 0, and that is right here. Please remember, finding that third 0, I can't use row 1 because that number right there will mess up that 0. Well, this is really easy because if I just add row 2 and row 3 together, I'll get it. Okay, so I'm going to go row 2 plus row 3 becomes my new row 3. Okay, across the top, doesn't change. First row. Second row, doesn't change. Add row 2 and row 3 together, and you get 0, 0, 0, -3. Unusual. If something unusual like that happens, if it were a quiz or a test, I would freeze. I would go back to my first step, and I would double check everything I just did. Okay, that would just take me a second to do that. I would definitely do that. We have not made a mistake. Look at what this means. This means 0 times x plus 0 times y plus 0 times z. What's that equal to, what I just said? That's a 0. The solid line is an equal sign, and then you have a -3 on the other side. Is 0 equal to -3? No. So you write down the word no, and it's no what? No solution. Yep. And you're done. I have a question for you. What if the last row ended up being that? No x, no y, no z. That's 0 equals 0. So that's either going to be infinite solutions or it's going to be all real numbers. There's a difference. There's a difference. Listen to this and then maybe that'll help you remember. Everybody just look right here and you don't have to do anything. I'm going to turn it into a 2-dimensional graph. Okay? What we just did is really a 3-dimensional graph. Don't worry about it. Just look right here and if you understand this, you're good. If I have this situation, then I've got 2 lines that lie on top of each other. That would be what my picture looks like. So is the answer everything on the whole picture, or is it an infinite number of things? What is it? It's not everything, because look, here's a point right there. Is that point on those lines? No. So it's not everything. It is an infinite number of things because those lines go on forever. So the answer is infinite solutions, not all real numbers. Okay, just so you know. All right, let's go to the next one. Example 6. Okay, on the top, 1, -1, -1, solid line 1. Underneath, -1, 2, -3, -4. Underneath, 3, -2, -7, and 0. The first thing I need is a 0 here. Follow the correct order unless it's an unusual circumstance, okay? Well, that's going to be easy to get a 0 there because I'm just going to take row 1, add it to row 2, and that becomes my new row 2. I always start with what is not changing. If you write in a sloppy manner, you're going to get messed up. I'm just telling you. Add row 1 and row 2 together, and I get 0, 1, -4, -4. The next place I need a 0 is here. Use the 1. Turn it into, did I do something wrong? Oh, this is supposed to be a -3. Is that what you're telling me? Okay, great. So this is -3. Is that what you're all telling me? Thank you. Watch me closely because I'm going to mess up too. I want that to be a 0. So use the 1. Turn it into a -3. So go -3 times row 1 plus row 3 becomes my new, tell me everybody, row 3. Good. So row 1 doesn't change. Row 2 doesn't change. Multiply the top row by a -3. You get -3, 3, 3, -3. Write row 3 underneath it. 3, -2, -7, 0. Add those together and you get 0, 1, -4, -3. Does anybody notice anything? They're the same. Row 2 and row 3 are the same. So I'm thinking something funky is going to happen. Okay? I'm still rolling with it, but I'm kind of bracing myself for something weird to happen. Okay? I need to get a 0 there. I cannot use row 1. So I use 2 and 3. You can go row 2 minus row 3 or row 3 minus row 2. It doesn't matter. Becomes my new row 3. Okay, so row 1 doesn't change. Row 2 doesn't change. Row 2 minus row 3. 0 minus 0, 0. 1 minus 1, 0. Negative 4 minus a negative 4, that's negative 4 plus 4, which is a 0. Negative 3 minus a negative 3, that's a negative 3 plus 3, which is a 0. I want you to write down 0 equals 0. That's what that means. What's the answer? Infinite solutions. Okay? All right, that's 6. We only have one more. And this is actually the second method I'm going to teach you. Okay? It's called row echelon form. On row echelon form, look at the difference, you guys. Look right here. You have to turn these into zeros. In addition to that, you also need to turn those into ones. Okay? So I'm going to give you the order. First thing I want you to do is that. Second thing I want you to do is that. Third thing is that. And then let's go down that diagonal. So let's go 4 and 5 and 6. Okay. Okay, here we go. It's a different method, but it's going to feel almost exactly the same. Turning those ones into ones is so easy. So this is really not any more difficult than what we just did. It's a little more work, but the difficulty is super, super low. Okay? Okay, nice and slowly, please stay with me. 1, 1, negative 1, solid line 0. Underneath, 2, 1, negative 1, 1. Underneath, 3, 1, 2, 2. The first thing I need is a 0 right here. Use the 1. Turn it into a negative 2 and add them together. So go negative 2 times row 1 plus row 2 becomes my new row 2. Row 1 doesn't change. Row 3 doesn't change. Take a negative 2 and multiply the top row by that. So you have negative 2, positive 2, and 0. Write row 2 right underneath it. Add those together and you get 0, negative 1, 1, and 1. Watch me for mistakes. If I make a mistake, raise your hand and correct me, okay? Okay, the next thing I need is a 0 here. Use the 1. Turn it into a negative 3. So go negative 3 times row 1. Added to row 2 becomes my new, added to row 3 becomes my new row 3. Row 1 doesn't change. Write it down. Row 2 doesn't change. Write it down. Multiply the top row by a negative 3 and you get negative 3, 3, and 0. Write down row 3. 3, 1, 2, 2. Add them together. 0, negative 2, 5, and 2. The next thing that I need is a 0 here. Don't use row 1. Take that -1 in row 2, make it a +2, and pair it up with the -2. How do I do that? Multiply it by a -2. So I'm going to go -2 times row 2. That turns that into a +2. Added to row 3 becomes my new row 3. So row 1 doesn't change. Make sure you're paying attention, you guys. This is the beginning of a long series of lessons. Don't change row 1 or row 2. Take row 2 and multiply it by a -2, and you get 0, 2, -2, -2. Write row 3 right underneath it. Add those together, and you get 0, 0, 3, 0. The next thing I need is a 1 right there. Got it. Don't have to worry about it. The next thing I need is a 1 right there. Turning something into a 1 is so easy. All you do is write down the row it's in, row 2, and you divide it by what is in that slot. So you're just going to divide it by a -1. Okay, and that's going to become your new row 2. So row 1 doesn't change. Row 3 doesn't change. Dividing something by a -1 just means change the sign. So you have 0, 1, -1, -1. The last thing that I need is a 1 right there. So easy. Take the row number, write it down, divide it by what's there, becomes your new row 3. Then you'll have 3 over 3, which is 1. So row 1 doesn't change. Row 2 doesn't change. Divide by 3. 0 divided by 3 is a 0. So this is 0, 0, 1, 0. I'm done with my matrix. I've got my zeros, I've got my ones. Start at the bottom. No x, no y, 1z equals 0. So I know that z is 0. People get confused. They're like, once I have that, then what do? You go to the row up above. That means no x, 1y, minus z equals -1. That just means y minus 0 equals -1. The 0, you didn't even need to write that down. That just means y equals -1. Go to the top. X plus y minus z equals 0. I'm trying to find x. So that means x minus 1 minus 0 equals 0. The minus 0 wasn't even necessary. Pull your 1 over, it becomes a positive. You get x equals 1, and you're done. Okay? All right, I want to see how you are. Who says, I'm good? Let me see. Give me a big raise. Okay. I want to say a couple of things to you before we look at your quizzes. Everybody freeze for just a second. Before we look at your tests. This is what's going to happen to you. Okay? Listen. Very likely. I just want to forewarn you. Okay? You're going to go home. You're going to do a problem. And you're going to get the wrong answer. You're going to check it. It's going to be wrong. Then you're going to go back to the beginning of the problem. You're going to follow through everything you did. And you're going to find a mistake. You'll erase what's left. You'll finish it. And it's still going to be wrong.
What?
And then you're going to get more and more and more, what's the word? Frustrated. Okay? Listen carefully. If you get to that point, put it down and walk away. Okay? Because you are going to get frustrated. I promise you. Okay? That's one thing I want to say. Just be prepared for that, okay? Please be quiet. Shh. The next thing I want to say is this. You have to come back to class on Wednesday being awesome at this. So if that means coming in and getting help or having me help you during lab, whatever it is, we got to do it, because look what's going to happen. When I see you on Wednesday, the left-hand side, you have to get a 0, a 0, a 0, which we just did. You have to get the 1s, which we just did. And you also have to get those zeros. So it's today's with a little bit more added on to it. So if you come back confused, you're not going to be able to do the next one. Okay? Is everybody with me? Okay.